Welcome back, everyone. Today was week 2 of the ProChess League, and like last week, I was also in the lineup for the New York Knights as we faced off against the California Unicorns. Now, we won our first match last week, so hoping for more good results here in week 2. Now, after the first 2 rounds, we were doing very well. I was on 2 points out of 2. Vladimir Fedoseev also on a 2 out of 2. Our boards 3 and our boards 4 were fighting hard, and we were leading by a score of 5-3 with 4 rounds in each, or 4 games in each match. So 4 games in round 1, 4 games 2, 3, 4. Winning score that you needed is 8.5 points. Now we were leading 5-3, so we had a 2-point margin going into our third round. Now in this third round, I was playing against Ray Robson with the black pieces. So let's jump right into it and take a look at the game. So here we go. I'm playing with a black piece against Ray Robson. Ray starts by playing this move c4. Now I choose to play knight f6 here. I could of course play e5 and go right into an English, but I thought I would play knight f6 instead. Ray plays knight f3, and now I play a very unusual move, which is pawn to a6. Now the reason I played this move was sort of twofold. The reason that I did it first off was when Ray went knight f3, I was under a very strong impression that he wanted to play a Catalan opening with g3 and bishop g2. So that was my assumption based on him playing knight f3. Ray normally, if he's going to play things that are a little bit more mainline, he would have played like d4 knight c3 or even d4 knight f3. But the move order definitely threw me off, and I thought, okay, I'll play a6 here, because now if white plays g3, you can possibly play this move b5 here, striking at white's center. If white trades and then goes bishop g2, you can play bishop b7 to oppose the bishop on this long diagonal. And additionally, white doesn't have a lot of control of the center. You can play e6 c5, maybe in a perfect world even something like e6 d5, and you get c5 here, and you have this great strong center. So after a6, Ray plays knight c3, which stops me from playing b5. But additionally, if I try to now play a normal developing move like e6, white can actually go e4 here, because when I play bishop b4 like in the Nimzo Indian, now white has this move e5 attacking the knight, and the knight has no good squares in the center. And after the retreat, white plays d4 and gets a really big center himself, and he's off to a great start. So I played d6 here. Ray now goes d4. If white were to play e4, black has 2 options. You can play either pawn to e5 here to take a bit of the center, or even c5, and this kind of looks a little bit like some kind of weird Sicilian. So Ray plays d4 instead, preventing me from playing either c5 or e5. So in this position, I now continue with this move pawn to g6. Ray plays e4, and I go bishop g7, bishop e2, and now I go bishop g4. It's worth noting, of course, if my pawn is on a7, this would just be a traditional King's Indian. For example, you can get this position after, say, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, d6, d4, castles, bishop e2. Same position, except when we look at the game here, you'll notice that what we have here is that this pawn is on a6. So if I castle, I've wasted tempo on a6, and therefore I try to go for a different plan here by playing bishop g4. Now the idea is that now I'm trying to justify this a6 pawn push by playing for b5 at some point. So what I really need here is I need a position where I can get this Ben-Oni structure, and I can play b5, which of course justifies the pawn push to begin with. So after bishop g4, Ray plays bishop e3, and now I castle here. He castles, and I go knight to c6, and Ray plays d5, trying to basically prevent me from playing typical King's Indian ideas like getting bishop takes, e5, d5, and then some kind of knight d4. Now on first glance, you'll probably think, well, wait, that hangs a pawn. However, after knight d7, you have this really nice dark square diagonal for your bishop, and your knight can either go to e5 or c5, and black has some compensation for the sacrificed pawn. So Ray plays d5. I chop the knight on f3. He takes back, and now I put my knight on the rim with knight a5. Now what I'm doing here is essentially trying to justify this move a6 on move number 2, because again, I want to go c5 and b5 at some point down the road. Ray plays bishop e2, and now I play c5. It's worth noting, if I just play a normal move like pawn to e5, after pawn to b4, my knight gets trapped on the rim. I cannot go to b3 because it gets chopped. If I go to c4, he captures here, and if I go to c6, white just takes with this pawn as well. So spaghetti-o, I'm going to lose this knight on the rim, and that would be very dim for my prospects in the game. So I play c5 here to stop b4, but also building this Ben-Oni structure as well. Ray plays a3 here, hoping to go b4 again, trapping the knight. I play b6, and now he plays queen to c2. Here I go pawn to e6, which I think is a mistake. If I wanted to play this idea with e6 to try and do something in the center, probably what I should have played was pawn to e5. And the reason that I say this is because if I go e5, white has a tough decision here. If he plays en passant with pawn takes pawn, after pawn takes in b4, for example, I can now go knight to c6, and after, say, let's just say queen d2, for example, I can play e5, rook d1, and I get this jumbo pony on d4 that is guarded by the diamond hands pawns. So therefore, I probably should have played this because when I go e6, what white can now do is play b4, and after knight b7 he can actually trade. Now the difference is that if we go back and move, if I play e5 and white goes b4 and I play knight b7, white can no longer play en passant because you didn't play it immediately, which is the only way it is a legal move. And if white tries to take and go b4 and you get the knight c6, you're great. But here, after knight b7 takes, my knight is on this b7 square where it really can't go anywhere, versus c6 where it had the easy jump to d4. So Ray continues with f4. I go queen c7 here. The idea is actually quite straightforward. If white plays a move like bishop f3, potentially I can maybe trade the pawns on b4 and win this pawn on c4. So I'm trying to prevent white from moving this bishop to f3 immediately, after which white wants to go e5 and open up the scope. So he plays b5. Now I go a5 here. Probably a move that in retrospect I regret, because once I go a5, now this whole queen side is kind of stuck and white has all the play here in the center of the board. I can't really play d5 or e5 easily, and white can also double stack on the d file. Ray plays rook a d1. I go rook a8, and now he plays bishop f3, trying to go e5 at some point and I win this knight on b7. I play knight d8. Ray plays g4, and now I go knight d7. Now it's worth noting in this position white has a lot more space, so even though it looks like white is pushing p in front of his king on g1, it's actually very dangerous because I have no good breaks in the center. The queen side is completely jammed up here. There's nothing I can do. If I play d5 at some point, like here for example, white can just take and simply go knight takes, and white has an extra pawn on e4 here. So I can't really play d5. If I ever go e5 here, white will play f5, and then after, let's just say a move like queen c8, white has an overwhelming advantage with g5 attacking the knight to d7, and now this move knight to d5. And white's pawns on b5 and f5 actually control these critical e6 and c6 squares, so my knight can never jump to either d4 or the f4 squares where the bishop is trying to keep an eye on. So it's a very tough position to play. So I go knight to d7 here with a different idea, opening up this diagonal for the bishop. And now Ray makes a mistake here. He plays this move pawn to h4. If Ray had realized what my idea was, he probably would have gone knight to e2, because even though it doesn't really create any threats, black can't do a whole lot. Again, if I ever go e5 f5, now the center is closed and white will just jump with the knight back to d5. And if I don't play e5, I can't really go d5. There isn't really a whole lot of play, and white can always just slowly improve with moves like, let's just say h4, king g2, and at some point he can play g5 and potentially h5 h6, maybe even take. So if I play rook e7, maybe something like this followed by e5, and he goes after me on the g and the h files, and it's just simply a dreadful position to play. So fortunately for me, Ray plays h4, which now gives me this golden opportunity to play this move bishop to d4. So even though I've been very passive, when I'm able to potentially trade off these bishops, because white has started pushing these pawns very hard on the king side, you cannot move the pawns backward, and the pawn on f4 is now a very serious weakness. For example, if white's pawn was say on g3, just an example, I can never really go bishop d4, because after takes, pawn is on f4 is guarded by the pawn on g3. But once white has played this move g4 and now h4, this f4 pawn can't be guarded because you can't go backwards. And if you ever push, I can even take and open up the e file in the long term. So Ray plays queen d2 here, and now I play this move d5 after a long think. As you guys can see at this point in the game, I was up 3.5 minutes on the clock, and I felt like there was something. Unfortunately, because I am not 3,500 rated, and frankly I'm just terrible at chess, I missed the correct idea. What I should have played here was this very exciting move, rook takes f4. Now white cannot capture the rook, because then I would capture the king on g1. Now at first glance you think, wait, white just takes on d4. If you take back, white takes the rook, I take the knight, and yes, there is potentially a little bit of counterplay, but after queen takes d6, I only have a knight for the rook, and probably I will lose the game in the long term. So after bishop takes d4, on first glance you're like, okay, so these ideas just they don't quite work, so you can't play rook f4. But of course, if I was 3,500, I would have realized that in this position I have this very tricky move, rook e to f8, which guards the rook on f4. But additionally, I'm now attacking both the bishop here on d4, but also the bishop on f3 at the same time with the double stacked rooks. Now the game goes on here. Computer gives us very dank line with bishop g7, king takes g7, and queen takes d6, and after trade and knight to e5, bishop to g2, takes. Apparently the position remains fairly balanced here. Very hard to judge exactly what is going on, but it is playable. Instead, however, I play this move d5. Now the reasoning behind d5 was also quite straightforward here. White cannot play e5 because then I trade the bishop and go d4, forking the queen and the knight. And if white tries to take, now when I take on f4 with either the rook or the queen, it will be guarded. So say I take and white takes back. Now the rook is guarded. I can take with the pawn, for example, or just take with the rook on d4. But at any rate, the rook is always guarded here, so this should make more sense. Additionally, by playing d5, I'm trying to create some oxygen for my knights to breathe here, because after white takes, let's just say I can take to illustrate the point. At some point, the knights have a lot of squares, and this knight can go to e6 and target the pawn. This knight can go to c5, and suddenly the knights are really jumping really fast. So I played d5. Ray decides to take with the e-pawn, and now I play this move, rook takes f4, and here Ray misses another 3500 level move. In this position, Ray plays this move, knight to e2, which is a big mistake. What he should have done is played this very weird looking move, d6. Now this is a very hard move for a human to understand for a couple of reasons. First of all, when you're looking at this position with a double op combo, you want to open up diagonals for the bishop. So the intuitive way in terms of what you're looking at as a conceptual plan is that you want to take, and just to illustrate the point, say after knight e6, you can play a move like bishop d5, and you have the bishops on the diagonals. Now I know in this exact position it doesn't work, but this is about the specific concept of what you're aiming for with this light square bishop. So to a very strong player like Ray here, he's thinking, okay, I need to open up the diagonal. Additionally, it also makes sense because you can jump with the knight to d5 as well. So you can play on the diagonals with bishop d5. You can also play for an outpost with knight d5. So conceptually, you're thinking that you always need to take. You don't really want to play a move like d6, because now after takes, you can't use the diagonal. You have an open diagonal where the bishop can't see anything here. The knight can't really go anywhere either. It can go to e4, but that's not really making a whole lot of sense. And without the d5 square, what's the point? Now I was also helped out by the fact that Ray was low on time here. We were playing 10 minutes with 2-second increment, so it's not super easy. However, after d6, queen takes d6, white can play this very quiet move, king g2 here. Now I can't take the bishop because then I lose my queen, and I have to kind of move the rook or else I lose it. And when I go back with like rook f7, white can now go knight e4, queen to e5, and after trading everything on d4 here, white is much better. This knight can go to g5, it can go to d6. These knights on d7 and d8 are simply not doing anything, and I'm in a world of hurt here. Fortunately for me, Ray plays knight to e2, and now with 3 minutes and 53 seconds on the clock, I think for a minute and play this horrible move, rook to f7. Now if I was on my game, I would have played rook takes bishop, because after rook takes rook, knight to e5 here, I'm attacking the knight and the pawn. Now if white were to play knight takes bishop, guarding the rook temporarily, I just take the knight, and now you will lose either the rook or you will lose the bishop. One way or the other, you're losing a lot of material. If white tries to play a move like rook to, let's just say f4, for example, avoiding the capture, now I can play knight takes c4, forking the queen and the bishop here, and this is a disaster for white. If you take the bishop, you lose your queen. If you move your queen, I simply take the bishop, and then I take the rook, and after queen takes c4, bishop d6, you can do basic math here, and you'll notice that I have an extra bishop on the board, and I should simply win the game. But of course, because I'm not a great chess player and I didn't use my time adequately, I play this move rook f7. Ray decides to take the bishop, I take back, he takes back with the bishop, and now I take the pawn on c4. I would love to play queen to g3 check here, checking the king and attacking the bishop, but unfortunately white can just go queen g2 here, and there's not a whole lot I can do. If I trade the queens, white is winning because he's up a pawn here, and with the bishop combo and these very passive knights, it's just hopeless. So instead I take on c4, Ray takes on e6, I go knight takes pawn, and now he plays this very human looking move, bishop to a1, with the simple idea that he wants to create the double A battery checkmate with queen to b2 and queen to h8, because I don't have any dark square bishops. Additionally, it looks really scary because if white can get this other bishop to d5, this double op combo is just crushing on these long open diagonals. However, after bishop to a1, I do have this move queen c5, Ray goes king h1, and now I make a big mistake. I play this move rook f8 after a very adequate 8-second think. What I should have played here was actually the move queen to e7, attacking the pawn in h4, and after g5, I can now play this very quiet move queen takes a3, attacking the bishop on f3, but much more importantly, I cover the critical squares. The queen cannot go to this d4 square because I capture the queen. You cannot go to c3 or b2 either because my queen will simply trade off for the white queen, and then I'm ahead by a pawn in the endgame. So I should have done this, but of course I simply wasn't really seeing stuff, and Ray was really low on time. He had 11 seconds, so I played this move rook e to f8, stacking the two towers. Ray correctly plays queen b2, trying to checkmate me on h8, and now I play knight e5 in between. Now in this position, it's really hard to figure out what you're doing. Ray had 9 seconds. He's very low on clock, doesn't know what to do, and he makes a huge mistake by playing queen takes knight. What he should have done is played this very quiet move, bishop g2, because now the knight is simply hanging on e5. I can't really move the knight because then I get checkmated in the corner pocket. I also can't really guard the knight. If I put my knight here, well, he just captures this knight. So the knight is simply super loose here. So I would have to trade, and after rook takes f1, white can play the quiet move, bishop takes f1, and now I'm in really bad shape because the knight is still hanging. And if I go knight to f7, for example, now white can play rook e1, and I have this huge issue that now this knight is guarding the checkmating square on g7, but the rook is also attacking. If I move my other knight to guard this knight, then I lose to this queen move. So my knights are simply just glued to these squares, and there isn't a whole lot I can do. And probably I just lose. If I play rook e8, for example, white goes rook takes e6. Let's just say I throw in a check. White just goes king to h2, and again, there's just this simple checkmate on g7, and I lose the game. Now again, Ray very low on time here, finally makes a mistake by playing queen takes bishop. We trade, I take on f3, and now with white only having a lone bishop on the board, my rook is very active. My knight can also get an outpost on c5. The danger has passed. Ray plays rook d6 here. I go knight to c5, and here Ray makes a huge mistake. He plays this move, rook takes pawn on b6. Now this is a huge mistake because now I have this move knight d7, forking the rook and the bishop. White cannot check on b8 with the rook because then I just capture the rook. So the only square you can go to is e6 to guard the bishop. If you move the bishop after takes, and rook takes a3 with this outside pawn, this is simply winning as well. So here Ray plays rook to e6, guarding the bishop. Now initially here I thought that I had rook e3, which is pinning the bishop on e5 and winning the game, but white actually has rook e7, and after knight takes bishop b6, I will have to give this knight in return to stop this pawn from queening, and the game will end in a draw. So I go king f7 instead after a bit of a think, and this wins the game on the spot because now white cannot move the bishop anywhere because my rook is on the wrong color. If magically you could say put my rook not rook f1, sorry, if magically you could put my rook on f2, white can go bishop d4 attacking the rook, but because the rook is on a light square here, there's no bishop move to attack the rook, and if you move the rook away, I just win the bishop. So this is essentially game over. Ray plays rook to a6 here, and now I takes on a5. I go rook f2, basically trying to cut the king off on the back rank. Here Ray makes the final mistake. He plays pawn to b6. What he should have played was king g1, but after rook to b2, stopping this pawn from pushing here, and I have knight f3 or knight takes pawn, the game is over anyway. Instead he plays b6, allowing me to play knight to f3 here, and we set up the classic patented Arabian checkmate in the corner. Ray makes a check, I go king e6, and now he plays b7, allowing me to play rook h2. White king has no squares. You can't go to g1, you can't capture the rook, can't move forward either. It's simply game over. So it's very sporting of Ray to play into checkmate. Now this round went very well for us. We won this round by a score of 3-1, which meant we increased our lead, and we were leading by 3 points with only 4 games remaining in the final round. So in the final round, I am playing with the white pieces against Sam Shankland here. And in this game, I'm playing with white pieces. We're up by 3 points. So if I draw my game, we're guaranteed to at least have a tie, because if all other 3 boards lose and I draw, that means the match is evened out. So when I played e4 on move 1, I was expecting Sam to play e5, and I was intending to basically play the classic Ich bin ein Berliner draw with d4, knight d6, takes, a4, knight d4, takes, d5, takes, and probably make the repetition, and I go home early, and I assume the other players can do well. Now in retrospect, this turns out to be it turns out to be very fortunate for me that Sam actually plays c5 and plays the classic Siciliano instead, because as I will tell you now, and maybe you'll call this a spoiler or not, we actually lost on all other 3 boards. So we were up by 3 going to the match, but we did lose on board 2, board 3, and board 4. So it all came down to this game. So Sam decides to play the Siciliano. I play knight f3, he goes d6, and now I play c3 here. He plays knight f6, and I go bishop d3. Of course, I did not play the open Sicilian because Samuel Shankland is a player who is booked to the gills with opening theory, and he loves the knight off. So obviously in a game like in the ProChess League, I don't want to go into some like heavy theory and risk some super novelty being shown. So I play c3, goes knight f6, and now I play bishop d3, guarding the pawn. This is what is known as the Kopek system, and the idea is that white wants to go bishop c2, so say black plays e6 and bishop e7. You can now go d4, your bishop guards the pawn, but also you get a big white center, and additionally you can play for e5 and get great scope on this diagonal from c2 to h7. So Sam plays knight c6, I play bishop c2, preparing d4, and now he goes bishop g4, and here I play d3. I'd love to play d4, but after bishop takes f3, I cannot capture with my queen, because then black wins this pawn on d4. And if I have to take with the pawn here on f3, this is still actually okay, but after takes e5, d5, and knight to d4, black is a little bit for choice here because you have this great outpost. My pawns are compromised here on the f file, and it's just very hard to play. And additionally, I don't have any diagonal for this light square bishop either. So instead I go d3, Sam plays e6, I play knight bd2, he goes queen c7, I play h3, bishop h5, and now I play this move queen to e2. Sam plays bishop e7, and now I go knight to f1. Now the reasoning behind knight f1 is sort of multi-purpose. If I were to castle here, I had a feeling that in this situation with his team down by 3 going into the round, Sam would want to be very aggressive. And while this move is not necessarily a good move here, black can play something like g5, and after say g4, bishop g6, knight takes g5, h5. The h file is opening up, black can castle here. So just to illustrate it, black can even go rook g8, and you'll notice that black has a lot of play here, and I really don't want to allow this to happen. So instead of castling, by going knight f1, I force Sam into a decision. First of all, he has to make a decision. Which way is he castling the king? Now Sam decides to castle queenside. I go knight g3, and now Sam has decision number 2. Do you take or do you go back? Now taking is probably fine, but after queen takes f3, d5, and castles, white does have the bishop pair, and the show goes on. Instead, Sam plays bishop g6, and now I do castle to the king side, because with this bishop on g6, black can't really push p on the king side. With the knight and the bishop in the way, you don't really have any effective attacking plans. So Sam plays d5, trying to play in the center here. I go knight to h4, threatening to trade the knight for this light square bishop. Sam goes king b8, and now I take. It's worth noting the reason that Sam played king b8 is very simple. If I go a3, black can play this move knight takes e4, because after knight takes bishop, knight takes knight, pawn takes, and f takes g6 here. Black is basically up a pawn. Even if it's only temporary, black is up a pawn. However, if you try to play in the other order with knight takes e4 here, after knight takes bishop, knight takes knight, I don't have to capture the knight on g3. I can instead play knight takes bishop on e7 check, and then after you take the knight, now I take your knight, and I have 2 bishops for a knight, and I'm simply ahead by 1 piece. So Sam plays king b8. I decide to just trade and avoid any tactics. He takes, and now I go bishop a4. Now the reason behind bishop a4 is quite simple. I can't really play in the center. If I take on d5, black can take probably both ways, but frankly just taking with the pawn looks very good, because after say bishop d2, bishop d6, I have this weakness on g3. Black can also try to claim this open e file as well. So I can't really play in the center. I can't push either, because black simply wins this trade as well. So I can't push in the center. I don't really want to play f4 here, because after f4, black has a couple options, like knight h5 is one example, where after takes. Again, I don't really know what I'm playing for exactly, and black has ideas like rook g8 and g5 to attack on the g file. So I don't really want to play f4, but then I look at my piece and I look at the harmonization of them. This bishop on c2 is the one piece that's not really well placed. While I can develop the bishop and bring the rook into the game, which would be a very respectable plan, this bishop on c2 is behind these 2 pawns and not doing a whole lot. So how do I activate the bishop? I go to a4 with the idea of maybe trading the bishop for the knight, but also just keeping an eye on this knight for the long term as well. Black can't really do anything with this knight, because if you go to e5, I'll just play f4 and kick the knight out of town, and knight a5 also doesn't really do a whole lot, because I can play something like a3 and b4 to remove the knight. So putting the bishop on a4, I'm just keeping an eye on this knight. The knight can't move, and black has to come up with a plan. Now here Sam plays d4, which is a very, very committal move. Now after a bit of a think, I play this move c4 here. I didn't have to play. Computer actually thinks that after takes, if black takes with a pawn, I have bishop a4. If bishop d6 here, I simply trade and win due to the fork here. And if black goes king to a8, after rook c1, I'm going to be able to claim the c file, create a kebab, as well as a double stack on the c file, and it's all really, really pleasant for white. So black would have to take with the rook here, and after bishop to e3, black goes rook d7, intending the double stack, but rook c1, rook d8, and d4 is very, very strong for white. And if you move the queen, I can go rook c3, guarding the pawn, and then creating my own double stack, and this pawn on c5 is being eyed by the bishop and the rooks. However, I didn't want to spend too much time thinking, wanted to keep the game going, so I play this move c4, essentially closing the center, but still intending to trade this bishop for the knight. Now, it's worth noting, of course, in this position, if my bishop is on c2, the bishop really isn't doing a whole lot here behind these pawns. So I go c4, Sam plays knight d7, and now I play f4 for a couple of reasons. At this point, I can't really play in the center. Ideas like a3 and b4 to attack on the queen side are very, very slow, so I figure I need to do something on the king side with f4 here. Now Sam plays king e8, which I think is just a little bit too slow, because now I go e5, and now what I'm doing is I'm creating this great square for my knight. It can put pressure on the pawn on c5, but also black has trouble pushing these pawns. If you ever go f6 after takes, knight takes, I can even potentially just win this pawn on e6. So you can't really push the f pawn. It's very hard to push the g pawn unless you do it right away or take some big risk, and black's position is just very, very cramped. So Sam plays knight b6, attacking my bishop. Now here I make a decision to actually keep the bishop on the board, because when I go bishop d1, I now want to put the bishop on a completely different diagonal. Say black plays knight c8 and knight b6 back, and I get this bishop to f3. Now this bishop is on a really, really strong diagonal, keeping an eye on this pawn on b7, this knight on c6, and the king in the corner as well, and you cannot get rid of it. You don't have a light square bishop, so my bishop is just always targeting these pieces on this long diagonal, and black is in some trouble. So Sam, I think sort of out of desperation, wanting to create counterplay, plays this move g5, trying to break up my pawn chain on the king side. After g5 though, I take, and now he takes on e5 here, and I play this move bishop f4. Now it's worth noting, even though I have double pawns on g2 and g5, I do have an open f file that I can use as well. Sam plays bishop d6. Now if I had used more time, I'm not sure if I would have played bishop f4 right away, but the reason I did it is that I thought that after bishop d6 knight e4 I was much better. Now as you'll notice from the timestamp, I did use 40 seconds before playing this move, because in this position I did realize what his next move was going to be after knight e4. Nonetheless, at this point I didn't see anything better to do. So I play knight e4, Sam captures, I take with the knight, he takes back, and now I play this very important move bishop b3. Now in this position, I'm thinking about a couple things. First of all, I'm temporarily down a pawn here. Black has an extra pawn if you do the counting: 1 2 3 4 5 6 7, 1 2 3 4 5 6, and I have double g pawns. However, these bishops are very active, and when I play bishop b3 here, I'm stopping black from putting the knight on d5. What black would love to do in a perfect world is go knight d5 and swap the knight for the bishop and play something like g6. Black simply has an extra pawn. His center is very solid here, and black should win the game. In this position, I can't really keep the bishop on the diagonal that I want to keep it on, which is this long diagonal, because then black will go knight e3, get this great outpost and the connect 3, and again black is probably going to win the game. And if I go the other way with like bishop d2, now there's no pressure on this diagonal towards the knight and the queen, and after knight f5, black again will jump to e3 with a pony, or even go knight g3 or queen g3, and it's a simple disaster. So I have to be very careful here. Now I play this move bishop b3, and the idea is very simple. If black goes knight d5, I can trade or look for other ideas. Also here, without being able to go knight d5, let's just say black plays a6, I can actually ruin his pawn structure with g6, and now black has to make a choice. If he takes the pawn, I take this pawn on e6, and he's still up a pawn, but the bishops are on great diagonals here. They cover a lot of squares. These double pawns on g7, g6, very, very weak as well, and black has issues. So Sam here decides to just play knight d5 and get it over with the idea that he can create complications. But after I trade on d5 and play queen to e5, black has a lot of problems here. He has a weak pawn on d5. Also, his extra pawn is now double, so the pawns are weak in the center. Pawn on g7 is weak as well. f7 long term is going to fall as well. So it's really, really a disaster here. Now, I think when Sam played knight d5, he simply thought that he would be able to have some tactical solutions to his issues, but as it turns out, they don't exist. So he plays queen c6, I take on g7 here, goes knight f5, and now I take the pawn on f7. Now during the game, for anybody who's watching live, I made a comment here. I think when I played queen g7, where I said something like, you know, after knight f5, I know that I have queen e5 and I'm probably better, but I can also probably take the pawn on f7, and at the end of the day, if I don't see anything, I gotta play like a man and just take the pawn and go for the win. So after knight f5, I thought for a little bit, but I decided to take on f7, because what I realized here is that it looks a little bit scary with the queen, but the queen can't be captured. Additionally, I realized there were two other lines I wanted to show you. In this position, if black were to play rook dg8, attacking the queen, after queen f6, if black moves the knight, I can always just trade and go bishop d2, and these pawns are really, really bad. I have 3 pawns on the king side, so this should be a winning endgame. And black also cannot play rook to g6, because then you hang the rook in the corner. And if you try to do it the other way with rook hg8, queen f6, rook g6, now you hang this rook on d8 and lose the game as well. So it's very, very hard to play. So Sam plays knight f5, and now I decide to take the pawn, because even though it looks scary, the queen is getting out. When black plays rook d to f8, I can now go queen to c7. It is the only square here. There are no other squares available for the queen, but after queen c7, queen b5, bishop to e5, now I'm very quickly attacking his rook. The knight and the rook are very weak as well, and black does not have time to do anything here. So after I take on f7, Sam plays rook h f8, and now I go queen c7, plays queen b5, and now I play this very nasty move, bishop to d6. Now when Sam was thinking either here right before I took on f7, I was calculating this and I did see this move, so it was very nice that my calculations were on point here, and this effectively ends the game. The reason it ends the game is that black would love to go rook c8 attacking the queen. Queen has no squares. d7, you eat the queen. Queen e7, oops, there goes the queen. If I go to h7, a square on the other side, black can play knight takes bishop. Now the funny thing is, according to the engine, this is still winning for white, but I am missing a bishop. I'm simply down one pony. Now the pawn more than compensates for it, but that is beside the point. At any rate, it looks really scary. But the problem for black here is that if you go rook c8, I can play this move rook takes knight on f5, and now if you capture the queen, I have rook takes rook, which leads to the classic ice skater checkmate on the back rank, because after rook c8, rook takes rook, king has no squares here. To make matters worse, if black tries to take my rook, now I take your rook on c8 with checkmate. So you can't move the rook because then you get checkmate on c8. You can't take the queen because you lose the rook on f8. All moves here are losing for black, and it's just an epic disaster. So Sam decides to play the only move he can, which is knight takes bishop. Also, if black were to play rook d7, it's the exact same thing, by the way. Again, I can play rook takes knight because it takes its mate, and if you take the queen, this leads to that same position as before. So Sam plays knight takes bishop, I trade the rooks, and now I take, and at this point the game is effectively over, because even though I'm only up one pawn, I have these passed pawns, specifically the g5 pawn that is going up the board very, very quickly, and black also has issues with his king because he could get ice skated, so he's gonna have to create some lift by pushing his pawn to a6. So Sam plays rook e8, I go rook f1, he takes the pawn, temporarily evening out the material, but now I go rook to f8, plays queen e3 check. Not a move like queen to e4, because then again I have the ice skater with queen d8 check, rook takes queen, rook takes rook, which is checkmate. So he makes the check, which also guards the rook. I move my king to h2, and now he plays a6, stopping the idea with queen d8. Nonetheless, I play g6 here. He swaps the rooks and goes king a7. I take the pawn with check, and he goes back to a8. Now black's big hope here is that I'll play a move like, let's just say g7 for example, and black can actually make a draw because he has queen e5 check, and if I play g3, you simply keep checking forever. King cannot get out of this box. You just keep checking on these two squares, and the game ends in a draw. And if I try to play my king back to this square, again, you just go check, back, check, and again it's the exact same thing where you just yo-yo between these three squares and the game will end in a draw. So therefore I do have to be a little bit careful. Now here I make a very, I don't want to say it's a big mistake, but from an aesthetic point of view or an artistic point of view, I'm very upset that I played the moves that I did in the game. So I play this move queen d6, which basically cuts off these squares on e5 and f4 and g3. But what I should have played is I should have played queen to c7, because from c7 I still cover all the dark squares to my king, but more importantly I now support g7 and I create the very classic right triangle. Now, because when I go queen d6 in the game after queen g5, I cannot push the pawn, because even though I guard from here, it's not the same thing. Whereas with queen c7, queen g5, g7, queen covers the three squares, and I support the pawn, and the game ends on the spot. So this would have been really nice from a geometric standpoint, an aesthetic point of view, but alas, I'm not perfect, and I didn't play this move. Instead, I played queen to d6. Sam goes queen g5, trying to stop g7, and if black can push the pawn, he will be okay. Now in this position, I play this move queen to f8, goes king a7, and now I make the check, king to 8, and I play for the simple win with queen takes pawn, because again, there probably is some way that I can force this pawn through. I don't really know how. Maybe g7 itself wins, because in this position I have queen f1, queen g3, and I guess there's some way to win this. I don't even understand how I win this, but let me see. What does the computer say? I can apparently go queen f6 and win, because after check here I cover the square. But why do I want to allow this when black can also start pushing his pawn up the board? Now mind you, queen to f2, forcing the trade of the queens, just wins on the spot because I stop his pawn and I make a queen. But again, at this point, why do you have to do that when I know that when I take the pawn, black still has no checks on the dark squares? And when black takes on g6 and I go queen d5, I simply have two extra pawns. My king is safe, there are no checks on the dark squares, and the game is over. So I take the pawn on d4, and Sam resigns because he realizes here that now the queen is covering the dark squares again. If black plays say a5, I go g7 here, no checks on f4 or e5, and the queen guards the pawn. And let's just say black plays a move like a4. The cleanest way to win is to play queen g4, offering the trade of the queens. If we trade, I make a queen, and again, it doesn't matter that my pawns are tripled. And after black plays queen e5 check, I block with the queen Queen guards the pawn, king guards the queen, and the queen supports the last square on the board, where I will get a second queen and win the game. So black really has to basically go queen g6, but after queen d5, no check on d6, and in the long term with the 2 pawns on g2 and h3, I will very slowly march them up the board and win. So with this victory, I moved to 4 out of 4 on the day, a perfect score, and we do barely squeak by and win the match by a final score of 9-7. Now, as I said, we were leading going to this final round by 3 points over the California Unicorns, but we did end up losing on boards 2, 3, and 4. So by winning this game, I saved the day for the New York Knights, and we do win the match. Or sorry, it's the Gotham Knights to be technical, but we do win the match, and we are now 2 out of 2 in the Pro Chess League, and we move on to week 3. And I will of course be doing another recap for you guys when we play next week. I will probably be playing from Boston because I will be in town for the MIT Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. But I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap for now. I'll be back with more great recaps in the near future. Make sure to hit that subscribe button below if you have not already, and I hope you enjoyed it. And nothing but peace and love to everybody there. Hope you're having a great one. See you soon.